The shallow, nutrient-rich Gulf of Maine and the rivers which flow into it create the perfect breeding grounds for fish, shellfish, and other marine life. The Wabanaki peoples and European colonists after them were attracted to the marine bounty and built fishing boats to catch the rich resources. Some unique boat forms were designed to function off Maine's rocky coastline. The Matinicus group are Maine's most remote inhabited islands, lying over 20 miles offshore. On Matinicus, these boats are called double-enders. Most mainland people call them peapods. Fishermen developed the type around 1870 to work the ledges inaccessible to larger craft. The double-ended design could be rowed forward or backwards easily, preventing the need to turn the boat around in the narrow crevices of the rocky coastline where the lobster sheltered. Standing and pulling traps required stability, while the pointed ends made rowing steadily for miles possible. The lobsterman used the rocker beam as a lever to pull traps, throwing his weight forward on one gunnel until it almost reached the water, grabbing hold of the lobster buoying in line, and then throwing his weight backwards against the opposite gunnel, taking up the slack repeatedly until the trap broke the surface. This 15-foot double-ender was made in 1925 by Lin Young. She is an example of a lapstrake boat, planked on a mold with ribs and frames inserted afterwards. This 15-foot peapod, built in 1950 by Lin's son Merrill Young, is the last double-ender fished on Matinicus, ending a century of tradition. Merrill ran a second shop in Camden on the mainland, aft in the boat as a roller, which made pulling up 70-pound waterlogged traps easier. This is an example of a carvel boat, built turtled on a mold with the ribs attached first into the gunnels and then the planking added second. Sedgwick's coal family wanted a light rowing boat. A typical peapod is 300 pounds or so, but some unknown builder ingeniously solved the problem by building them this 14-foot canvas-covered peapod. Built in 1892 as canoe builders were transitioning from birch bark to wood and canvas canoes, boat builders of all kinds were experimenting. Captain Havilah Hawkins of Sedgwick began his career as a windjammer captain in 1950 with the schooner Stephen Tabor. In 1961 and 2, he designed and commissioned the building of the Mary Day, the first schooner to be designed to carry passengers. In addition to windjamming, in 1954 he began building a series of 47 peapods. His design was based on his experience with the type. His son Ron spotted the 15.5-foot peapod from 1910 on Vinalhaven, being used as a tank to wash buoys after 75 years of service. It is somewhat leaner than most models. The other 13-foot 9-inch peapod was the last one built by Havilah before his Brooksville shop burned in 1963. This peapod is well suited to recreation and is a few feet shorter than the working double-enders favored by lobstermen, making it lighter and easier to row and tow. While peapods began as workboats, Maine summer residents used them for fun. They rode well in morning calms and could be sailed in the afternoon sea breeze. Nate Eaton of Steer Isle built this 13-foot sailing peapod in 1941. Note the sailing rig and dagger board trunk. The stern is nearly plumb. The hard corners of the hull are characteristic of peapods, providing good stability. Mark Wadsworth of Rockport built this 14-foot, 10-inch North Haven-style peapod in 1920 as a recreational boat. He learned his building trade from Elton Whitmore, who was originally from the island. This smooth-planked pod has an extra-wide keel to protect the bottom planking from damage when the boat is hauled onto rocks. Short half-frames in between the long ones hold the boat together. Wadsworth used a similar boat with an outboard to lobster in Rockport in the 1950s. As motors came into use, double-ended motor launches became the common hull shape. This 18-foot double-ender built by William Upton of Millbridge in 1907 with its two-stroke make-and-break engine served as a lighthouse tender until sold for a lobster boat. The perfect peapod, a symmetrical double-ended design, was not found to be conducive for engines, So the Maine lobster boat builders eventually adapted the form into a pumpkin seed shape, a pointed bow and a broader stern to balance out the weight of the engine. Another fishery along the coast of Maine with a specially designed boat was the salmon and sardine weir fishery. Weirs are a form of fish trap made of brush or stationary nets adhered to poles that forced schooling fish into a heart-shaped enclosure where they swam in circles until scooped out into a waiting boat. This 15-foot 9-inch Lincolnville salmon wherry was built by Emery Griffin of Duck Trap in 1913, one of the few surviving examples of a common workboat used 150 years ago. The thick, flat bottom absorbed the wear of the rocky shores when the boat was hauled from the water. The narrow stern facilitated stern-first launching into the surf. It has 3 removable seats, one in the bow, one in the center, and one in the stern. The builder, like many shore dwellers in Maine, farmed and fished near Camden and built a few boats as well. Notice the brilliant net in the bow for scooping up the salmon from the weir. In 1946, Osborne Wade and Walter Alexander of Duck Trap based the 16-foot Cunner on the Lincolnville salmon wherries. For recreation, they modified her for an outboard and a flat-bottom keel. As a summer boat, she's a little fancier than normal and so has copper fastenings instead of iron. The scow was a common working craft in the commercial smelt fishery on the Penobscot River before World War II. This 30-foot, 10-inch boat was built by Earl Baker Jr. around 1934 in Winterport and fished by him until the mid-1950s. Smelt scows were heavily constructed of hackmatack, pine, and oak to withstand rough use and sheathed with tin for protection against floating river ice. 2 men crewed the scow and shared the work of fishing. The craft was originally propelled by a sculling oar in the stern. An outboard was added later, making life considerably easier. The 2 hand-operated winches, one at each end, were used to raise the net and other gear. Although not unique to Maine, the dory was a rowing boat used in our offshore and nearshore fisheries. This 16-foot dory made by Malcolm Brewer of Camden in 1936 is smaller than the larger Grand Banks fishing dories and has a crescent sheer, straight flaring sides, narrow tombstone stern, and a narrow flat bottom. The Moosabec Reach boat of Beals Island and Jonesport was a double-ended design like a peapod that had a flat underbody towards the stern, conducive to the transition to power. The Moosabecs had a skeg-built keel, or an external keel bolted on after the hull was built. The hull was narrow and light, making for a very fast boat. This design was lengthened out while keeping a narrow beam to become the Beals Island-style lobster boat still found today. Osmond Buddy Beal was in the Army in 1950 when his father Vinyl built this boat. Named after Buddy and his then-girlfriend Sylvia, it was the largest, at 33 feet, built on the island at that time. It was originally built with a spray hood. After Billy Thompson of Addison bought her in 1961, he added the shelter cabin in the Beals Island style, low with a diamond window. Whether propelled by oars, sails, or motors, the fishing boats of Maine were built to function in relation to the state's unique geography and harvesting techniques. We enjoy eating the day's catch brought home in these watercraft.